Away we go. All right, here it is. It's a Monday. It is episode 134. We get to sit here and chat with our good friend Jim Duquette, former Major League GM of the Mets and Orioles, MLB Network Radio, Sirius XM. You can follow him on X at Jim Duquette GM. It's all brought to you by Flat Stick Pub, whether it's a date night, guys night, ladies night, large group event. They've got you covered. Visit one of their 6 locations across the Northwest at flatstickpub.com. We should have just recorded the first 5 minutes that we were chatting as Jim was giving me coaching ideas, little league, all-star ideas. God, that's a wealth of knowledge. Man, I love it. I wish I should have asked you before the season.
I meant to get to you too, and a couple other things. I got some things you can have. I'll send to you, for the winter time and whatever. But I meant to get that to you sooner, and hopefully it'll help your team.
Hopefully it will. All right. Well, let's get right into it with the Mariners. 6-1 homestand. They're 7 games over 500, Jim. In fact, I don't know if you know this. This is the last year. It took them till August 5th to get to 7 games over 500. But here they are already on June 3rd to be 7 games over 500. I know they did it against the Angels, and I know the Angels are terrible. But you only can play the teams that are in front of you. And right now, even though they are a flawed baseball team, Jim, they're 7 games over 500, first place in the West.
Can't argue with it, right? I mean, like you said, you can only play the teams you play. You play within the American League West, and whether they're struggling or not, you still have to win games. It's not easy to win games at the major league level, even if the Angels are struggling, like you mentioned. But I think taking care of business at home also helps. I think we'll get into this, I'm sure, but winning after you fire a coach is always okay. I never liked firing coaches in season, but sometimes you felt like you needed to do it, and you see the offense perk up a little bit. Maybe it's not going to fix their offense. It's still a big issue for them. But when you look at where they are in the standings, I think they have a 4-game lead over Texas. That you want to try to give yourself some distance, even with Houston, because Houston's not going to go away anytime soon. So, and it always kind of get to, all right, we got one more month of June. Let's see where we are at the end of it, so that you can figure out. And right now, you should know what your holes are and weaknesses are. We know that with Seattle, it's offense. But then it becomes, all right, in July, who's available, and what's it going to cost? Those are all the things that you're going to go through as a front office at this time of the season.
All right. So what did you make of the move to remove Brant Brown? I mean, I've made fun of it over and over because they called him an offensive coordinator, which just we just people in Seattle hate it, like just absolutely hate it. Like, can we not marry football and baseball together? You probably know Brown being around baseball and the circles and all that. Did the move surprise you of removing him?
It really surprised me. He's had a good reputation, obviously going from the Dodgers to the Marlins. They went out and got him and brought him in and into Seattle. And so the expectation was really high. And I thought I was seeing a little bit of, let's say, a trending up, at least when it came to runs scored, some of the other metrics in the month of May. The strikeouts are there. The question a lot of times is do you think it's roster related or do you think it's personnel related? So personnel meaning coaches, or is it roster related meaning is it the players that you brought in? Like it's one or the other. And I think as a GM, you're the one that's making the calls here. You're going to focus obviously on it's more of the personnel, the coaching, the technique, and everything else. And we're not privy of that, of things going on behind the scenes. Clearly there was something wrong, philosophically or whatever. I have a couple of problems with it. First off, very rarely do you see changes like this really change the overall offensive productivity, in a big way. Like I fired hitting coaches middle of the season. We got maybe marginally better. Maybe perception was we got better, but more than likely you are what you are right now. Secondly, if these issues were philosophical, that should have been flushed out in the interview ahead of hiring him. It should have never even been hired if you're going to make a change after 60 games or whatever it is. So there's a problem and a breakdown in the process of hiring is the way I would view that as well. So a couple things there that stand out on the front office side that you just don't make changes like that 60 games in. If you do, usually it's because you had an issue with them in the wintertime. He wasn't there that long to have issues with them in the wintertime.
It seems like it just the reading between the lines, Jim, they've talked a lot about here in the last week or so about simplifying things, that maybe his philosophy or whatever he was teaching just was too much for them to devour on a nightly basis.
So, and I think that's a good point that you see with teams, and I saw this with the Mets recently too, where simplifying the approach a lot of times is better. How much information you feed from the front office to your hitters is a subjective thing, but you can confuse guys, right? And they get too analytically driven. I'll give you an example. There are pitchers' tendencies out there. First pitch fastballs at this percentage they're throwing for strikes, or 0-1 counts, they throw breaking balls this number of times, and 1-0 counts, they throw fastball or off speed, whatever it might be. There are tendencies that every pitcher has, and a lot of these hitting coaches are getting into those tendencies and trying to give you an advantage. And if you know a fastball's coming, or you can play percentages at 75% of the time a fastball's coming, okay, that's a big advantage for a hitter. But it confuses a lot of offensive players in that regard when you're thinking about percentages rather than just, hey, let's work on just hitting the ball, seeing the ball, and hitting the ball, and using that up the middle approach that is taught so much. So it has, I'm sure, something to do with that, maybe even a little too mechanical in their swings, and rather than just, see ball, hit ball, which is also very simple, but it's sometimes better than the alternative, which can be confusing.
Yeah. I mean, I think at times, at any level of baseball, right? Do we give too much information, and can too much information, even a professional hitter, Jim?
Yeah.
Can that just be sensory overload for these guys?
Yeah, it's we just call it the analysis, the struggles through over analyzing. I think that's kind of stands out to me. And a lot of times, one of the signs that you would see, let's say in game, is you'd see a lot of fastballs that were taken for strikes, or you would see kind of these awkward type of swings where they're not taking that full swing. They look like they're fooled more times than not. Those are usually indicators that they're thinking along the lines of they're guessing for what pitch is coming. And that can be a lot of times process oriented and confusing with some of these hitters. So those would be indicators that if you're watching the game, you see some of that, you go, oh, they're still over analyzing what's going on at the moment.
It's almost at the youth level. I'm sure you've said this a million times, and there's probably like a parents that are listening to this, if they coached back in the day, where you always say yes, 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 no, right?
Correct.
It was always think swing, and then at the very last second you can say no, but don't go into it with like a no, 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 and then yes, because then you're swinging too late, right?
Right. Because listen, there is emphasis on controlling the strike zone and not chasing, not swinging out of the strike zone, right? If you can do that and command the strike zone as a hitter, there's a better chance of you getting on base. The more times you get on base, the more opportunities you have as a team to drive in runs. Like, there's all of those things that come in it. But in some ways, you see a lack of aggressiveness with that mindset. And that's where I think we're probably seeing some of that play itself out in the high level of strikeouts.
So who's responsible for Brown being fired?
So in this particular situation, it's never done without the general manager's input and the manager's approval, right? So the manager has, managers that in the trenches, he sees what's going on, he suspects certain things, or the general manager comes down and says, listen, this is not working. And to me, you have to go back to who hired him, right? If this was, somebody who was brought in from the outside and it was brought in by Jerry DiPoto, that's sometimes you have a conflict between the manager and general manager too, that you have to kind of work through. To me, it was always a matter of, well, this wasn't, I saw Scott's comments, Scott Servant says, hey, this is not solely on Brant Brown, but yet you're holding him. He's the only one that's held accountable because you can't change over the roster. Well, you have to hold somebody else accountable, whoever it was that hired him, right? And I think in this particular case, it seems like Jerry is the one who went on the recruiting trail to bring him over. He asked for permission to do it and all that. That's what it seemed, but it's hard to know for sure.
Let me rephrase that. I guess what I meant by, and it was poor on me setting it up, when I mean responsible, is it Is it on the players because they didn't perform? Is it on the general manager who went out and got him?
Right.
I said this on Friday when they made the announcement. To me, it falls on ownership because ownership didn't want to go out and spend this offseason on offensive players. They wanted to go on the cheap for it. So ultimately, that decision led to Brown being fired because Brown can only, or any of these guys, can only work with the talent that they're given.
Right. Yeah. So right. There's a lot of different responsibilities out there, right? So we talked about the kind of the internal. All right. Well, who hired them, and what was that issue? When you look at the personnel, when I say personnel, meaning the roster itself, the roster's flawed. You can see that. But we've talked about this before. With Jerry DiPoto in the front office group, when they're bringing in and changing over that offense, because the offense was very inconsistent last year too.
Sure.
Way too many strikeouts, that sort of thing. They could have had other offensive players that they brought in. JD Martinez, by the way, is having a pretty good season. I know he started off slow with the Mets. He was injured, but that kind of guy is perfect, in that lineup, and others like him. But they chose not to spend the money. All they had to do, they basically had to, rearrange the deck chairs right on the ship. You're going to have some inconsistency there along the way. So I do blame ownership because they weren't willing to spend or increase the payroll off of the successful seasons that they've had over the last two. I know they didn't make the postseason there, but this was a roster that needed not too much more money, and I think they would have had a better offensive group.
Boy, Jim, we and I'll say we. I mean, we all kind of nitpick these guys, but yet as we started off this conversation, 7 games over 500, first place in the West. Now the West isn't all that good, but they're up 4.5 on Texas, or 4, and then 7.5 now on Houston. And what has allowed them to get there is a pitching staff that is just pitching lights out right now. They just did something they've never done before in the history of their organization. They had 3 starters pitch a series in which they didn't give up a single earned run. I mean, what they're doing right now is just historic from a pitching standpoint, especially with the starters.
Yeah, and anytime you throw Castillo out there as a and then you have Kirby backing him up and Gilbert, like it's unfair, really. Will and Miller on top of that, how good they are, and you have Hancock, who's a quality starter, who's acting as their 6th starter, but he'd be probably a number 4 starter anywhere else. It's a huge advantage, and that's how you can go on win streaks, right? And with Castillo, it's his last 10 starts. I saw it was a low 2 ERA. Like that is an incredible run. Last night was another impressive outing that he had there. And I don't care if the Angels are undermanned offensively and pitching wise; he still got to get outs like he did. So, yeah, this is a stretch. It's unusual. What they've been able to do too, to their credit, is keep their guys healthy. That is a huge issue around the sport. I mean, go look at the Giants right now. They've got 6 or 7 pitchers on the IL. They got 6 position players. For the most part, the Mariners have stayed healthy, knock on wood, with that starting pitching group.
Okay, so why are they so good, it seems like, and I think we've probably asked you this before, but why are they so good at finding, developing, cultivating these pitchers?
Yeah.
And they feel like there's a philosophy with it. Like the organization knows what they're doing with these guys.
Yeah.
But when it comes to position players and hitters, they seem to be kind of lost in the middle of the Pacific Ocean on that.
Right.
Why is that?
So you do get into these evaluations where there was a period of time where the Mets, where we were really strong in pitching too. And we had a philosophy, and it not just went to scouting, but it went into player development too, where you were working on specific pitches and you had excellent pitching coaches and you worked on pitch types and worked on pitch sequencing, and just everything was clicking all at once. And that's what it seems like with the Mariners they have on their pitching side. They also have, when you look at it, we were just talking about this with the draft. Whoever they end up drafting, you can bet that they'll get a pitcher that has some kind of physical presence. When I say that, 6'3", 6'4", just like monster arm with like a couple of pitches, but they'll have to develop another 1 or 2. But they have the physicality like Castillo does, like Kirby does, like Gilbert does, where they can handle a workload. They look like those guys that could give you in the old school 200 innings, right? That's that for Seattle, like that's almost their MO. You also know on the position player side, they have their struggles, and I think that's where they need to figure out on an evaluative side first off, and then on a coaching and player development side, what their philosophy is, because it seems like they're changing course. It seems like they're like last year. Oh, we didn't have enough offensive contact guys in T-Mobile. T-Mobile was playing like this. Like it seemed like it was a surprise to them that T-Mobile was playing that way. Like everybody knows it's a tough hitters park, but you need contact guys and gap to gap type hitters. It seemed like they didn't realize that, or it was just something that was confusing in that sense. So for me, that philosophy, whatever that is on the hitting side, they're going to have to continue to find some answers.
You confident they will be aggressive at the deadline as we get closer to it?
No doubt they will be aggressive. No doubt they're going to be on offensive players. Be curious on, the flexibility that Jerry's going to have when it comes to the financial side. Because for me, if you were kind of swapping out payroll this winter, that should have been with the idea or thought that you would be able to spend, even if it's a little bit, add on, if you're in this position like they are. These don't come very often. You can sit there and say all you want to have sustained success, but it's hard when you're in that postseason mix to repeat it every year. This is an opportunity, a rare opportunity for them to go deep in the postseason because of this health in their pitching. So they absolutely will be aggressive, but on the offensive side is really where they need to go.
What team should they be looking at right now? I know the Blue Jays GM came out and said, listen, why would we get rid of Bo Bichette? Why would we do anything with Vlad Guerrero? Let's start there. You believe him, or do you believe both will be available?
I believe the general manager that they don't plan on moving either one because they've got another year left in their contract, and I think they also are trying to extend them and keep them in a Jays uniform. Now, that maybe this winter that changes, but I do believe that they will be holding on to those two. Now, if they're sellers, Justin Turner's a guy who has a DH/first base. He's playing a little bit of first base here yesterday, and he's an RBI machine. He's a guy that lengthens a lineup. He would be an interesting guy to keep an eye on. They don't have a ton of other. Like one of their issues too is offensive inconsistencies there in Toronto too. And they're very similar, but a better version, a lesser version than Seattle, with starting pitching and bullpen, whatever. So, they might be an answer for the Mariners with Justin Turner, but I think you have to look elsewhere, like the Mets, J.D. Martinez, Pete Alonso. Those are going to be guys that are going to be available. I'd look at the White Sox with somebody like Tommy Pham. You saw him. He has that little edge that you want on your team, right? So guys like that. Miami, might have like a Josh Bell would be available, but they don't have a ton of offense either. They've really struggled. But those are some of the teams that I think you'll have to, you'll be looking at if you're the Mariners. I
love Tommy Pham. Because I like it. I like Pham because of not only good offensive weapon. Obviously, he's going to play in the outfield, but you just touched on it. It's that edge he brings to your team.
It's hard to find those guys who don't care what others think of them. They know what winning baseball is all about, and they kind of push the envelope and push the issue with the team. He was a huge part of Arizona's run last year. They acquired him at the deadline. He had that edge. We saw he had a good postseason too. He contributed a couple wins for them offensively. So he's a great guy for that. And, they need outfield help as well. And, he's not going to mess around either. Like last year, he was with the Mets. I loved what he said. He said this is the least hardworking good team I've ever been on. Like he called out the team. You hardly ever see that. I love that.
No.
What is somebody going to actually say to him? Because as he said yesterday, he goes, "Yeah, I prepare myself to fight if I need to."
I would not mess with him. Contreras is a big kid too, man. But my God, the way that Pham looks.
Oh my God, I love it. I love it.
I would have walked away.
He trains. What did he say? He trains for fighting.
He trains to fight in the off season for moments like that.
For moments.
Yeah, I'm not.
Sign me up for more Tommy Pham.
Okay, so all right, the Aaron Judge month of May. My God, remember in the beginning? Was it in this year? Yeah, wasn't it the first 2 weeks or week that he was booed by the home team, home crowd?
Yes, first 2 to 3 weeks he was booed. His numbers, and Soto's too.
Stupid.
But Judge's numbers 15 home runs in his last 26 games. That's absurd, right? And
Just,
Soto has 8 homers in his last 15 games. So those two
oh
guys,
my
and then in
God.
addition to Anthony Volpe, their shortstop, second-year player, had a hitting streak of like 21 games. You add
Yeah.
those are the 3 top guys in their lineup, and man, they are mashing right now. That offense is clicking, and they just had a 7-2, I think, 3-city road trip on the West Coast. That never happens. From teams going from east to west, they just have trouble. The Yankees did not have any trouble on that trip.
Yeah. They looked the part. I mean, well, he is just, I mean, that lineup, those first 3 guys, I mean, are just,
Yeah.
I don't know how you go against those guys. I don't even know how you pitch to them. I don't think anyone's figured that out yet.
Yeah, they haven't figured it out yet, and I think Aaron Boone took Alex Verdugo, who's a left-handed hitter, average player, but they put him in the cleanup spot about a month ago, and he's taken off too. And then you have Stanton behind him, and then you have Anthony Rizzo, who struggled. And it's not been perfect. It's a kind of top-heavy offense, similar to what you see sometimes with the Dodgers. But those top 3 or 4 guys are so good right now. It is really hard to pitch to that group 2 or 3 times through the lineup.
The Mariners made a move as you and I are recording this here on Monday, June 3rd. They've made a deal with Victor Robles, the veteran outfielder.
Yep.
They had optioned. He is going to take the roster spot of Jonathan Clase, who they've optioned back down to Tacoma. What do you think goes into the thinking there of Victor Robles?
So Robles is a Nationals, used to be a top prospect for them, center fielder, has some tools, athleticism, some speed. He's been a high strikeout guy, and he has not, he has not done well offensively. So this one has
perfect. He fits right in,
scratching
Jim.
my head, honestly, on this one, because he's not an upgrade in those areas. But I think what they're hoping, and he's kind of a one of those guys where I call him, they get you fired because as a general manager, you're like, this guy's he's gonna figure it out one of these years, and by the time he figures it out, you're gone. They fired you. So I think with Robles here, it's a low risk, higher reward for the Mariners, but I would not expect much on the offensive.
Yeah, I mean, just it doesn't really make much sense here, but
No.
Hey, whatever. We try to make sense of all of this, and you never
it
truly
make
can.
sense, like you said.
Hey, going back to Guerrero, why do you think they had him go back over to third base? I mean, he hadn't played there since his rookie year.
So
was it an injury thing?
Great question, because this is an act of desperation in some ways with Toronto, because like you said, he played 2 innings at third base like 2 years ago. Full time was 5-6 years ago. He played with a lot of energy yesterday, and it helped with the way they structured the lineup, because Turner didn't DH. He played first. They had Daniel Vogelbach. You remember Vogelbach? Bogey.
We
the left-handed
him
hitter. How can you forget him? He had a couple hits, and they wanted to get some at-bats for him too. But this is an admission by the front office that they did not, like, their goal and philosophy to build around pitching and defense has been a failure, because they're putting an offensive guy over at third base rather than focused on the defensive side of things. So that to me, and they're now at a point where, like, there's an urgency that I haven't seen with them recently. This is finally an urgency where, okay, they move Springer down in lineup, they move Vladdy to third. I think you're seeing some of those things. Those are all things, by the way, that you always love to see with, like, the Mariners too. Like, change up that lineup a little bit if it's not working. I think their issue has been more Julio, not producing, J.P. Crawford injured, that type, asking part-time guys to get, full-time at bats. Like, it's been a little bit of that versus Toronto, who, have had underperforming offensive players.
How aggressive do you think other teams are going to be at the deadline? I mean, obviously there's going to still be a lot of teams left. I mean, you've mentioned some of them. I mean, White Sox are done. Marlins are done. Rockies are going to be done. Mets are done, right?
Yep.
Nationals. I I don't know where would you
Angels.
Angels, where would you put the Blue Jays, Tigers, D-backs, Rays? Where would you put them?
So I think each of those teams is has different stories of they want to win. Like Detroit will be lesser. Detroit will be a lesser team in terms of making moves because they're trying to win more games, trying to set a tone for next year. I think that stands out. Toronto is all in. San Diego, all in. Who's the other team you mentioned? Arizona.
Arizona, yeah.
Been injured a ton. They're all in, if they can get healthy. So I think all of those teams are going to be, unless they're 10 games under 500, I think they're going to be buyers, not sellers.
Okay. And then we talked about offensive help, but we still think bullpen help, correct?
Always need bullpen help. Always need bullpen depth. It does take a little bit of extra in terms of sharing the workload. Guys get used a lot down the stretch, and so the more guys you can have, I think that that makes a lot of sense for them. There'll be plenty of relievers out there and available.
Angel Hernandez. We didn't, right? Because we didn't talk last week because Memorial Day.
Right.
Okay, so forced out or what? Did he just go? Well, the time is now, or what did you make of that?
So they entered into negotiations with him about 3 weeks prior to that.
Okay.
To see if they could entice him into retiring, and so they gave him enough money to. To get him to retire, and it was long overdue. The worst umpire, unfortunately, both reality and perception. Sometimes perception is reality. In this case, perception is reality. He was not very well liked either.
So who do we turn our attention to next?
Well, there's a couple guys out there. Here's the hard thing. CB Buckner is not a very good umpire, but he has good bedside manner. And players like him. He's honest. He'll admit when he has a mistake. So he's one guy for sure. There's a couple others. I'd have to go back and look at my list because I don't want to name.
But
guys.
Buckner is the one. Would be the next obvious one. But you say the player's okay with him.
They're okay with him in the sense because he's not confrontational. Angel Hernandez got himself into trouble because he was so confrontational. He thought he was right all the time. He never took responsibility for the mistakes that he made. And I think that just turned off so many players. There was no going back.
All right. Well, yeah, it's we've discussed this before, right? It's I wonder why Major League Baseball, and I know the strength of the players union, or excuse me, the umpire union, all that, but when people don't do their jobs, I don't care what you do, you get fired or you get reprimanded. It just seems like they just never would go down that road with their umpires.
Or you get demoted to the minors, right? Anything would have been fine. That's the level of accountability. Instead, Major League Baseball chose to say, well, if they weren't very good, then they didn't get the monetary and high prestige assignments of the postseason or All-Star game. That's not accountability. That's it's just not. It's they did what they could because of the strong union, like you mentioned, but. Every one of these umpires, they basically had tenure, like a college professor. It was very difficult to, unless they did something egregious, it's some kind of, issue with their contract that was egregious. They weren't going to be fired ever, So you had to kind of figure out different ways. And I think this is one way that you're going to see more of with the umpires moving forward, because this set I think a precedent. For them, at least in the short term.
Yeah. All right. Episode 134 in the books. Jim Duquette, former MLB GM, Mets and Orioles. You can check them on MLB Network Radio, Sirius XM, all brought to you by Flat Stick Pub. Visit flatstickpub.com for the latest. Thank you for the baseball talk. Thank you for the baseball tips.
Little coaching tips.
The coaching tips. We appreciate it. Soon. All right. There he is, Jim Duquette, every Monday here at pucksports.com.